The white lace of her wedding dress tangled around Grace Wellington's ankles as the swollen waters of Canyon River swept her off the rocky bank, her scream lost in the roar of spring runoff that had turned the normally placid crossing into a churning beast. She had been standing there only moments before, watching her future husband argue with the preacher about payment for the ceremony, when the ground beneath her satin slippers simply gave way, eroded by weeks of relentless rain that had plagued Kansas in the spring of 1875. The cold water hit her like 1,000 knives, stealing her breath, dragging her under with greedy fingers that cared nothing for her carefully pinned hair or the orange blossoms woven into her veil. Lucas Remington saw her go under from 50 yards downstream where he had been watering his horse. The cowboy did not hesitate, did not think, did not calculate the risk to his own life. He spurred his bay gelding into the savage current, standing in his stirrups as the horse fought against the flow. His rope was already in his hand, years of ranch work making the motion as natural as breathing. He spotted the flash of white fabric breaking the surface and rode harder, angling to intercept her before the river carried her into the rapids that lay another 100 yards ahead, where the canyon narrowed and the rocks turned the water into foam. She came up gasping, arms flailing, the weight of her dress pulling her down again. Lucas pushed his horse closer, felt the animal stumble as the riverbed dropped away beneath its hooves, and then he was diving from the saddle, hitting the water with his boots still on. The current grabbed him immediately, but he was a strong swimmer, had been swimming in rivers and streams since he was old enough to walk. He kicked hard, his arms cutting through the water, and then his hand closed around her wrist. She fought him at first, panic making her dangerous, and he took an elbow to the jaw that made his vision spark. But he held on, using his superior strength and his knowledge of water to angle them toward the far bank where the current ran slower. His lungs burned, his clothes weighed him down, but he had her waist now, had pulled her against his chest, and he put his mouth close to her ear. "Breathe slow, I have got your waist," he said, his voice cutting through her terror with a calm authority that came from years of handling spooked cattle and frightened horses. "Stop fighting me and breathe slow. I will not let you go." Something in his voice reached through her panic. She went still in his arms, her chest heaving, and he felt her nod against his shoulder. He kicked harder, angling toward a fallen cottonwood that stretched into the water like a skeletal hand. His fingers closed around a branch and he hauled them both toward it, using it to pull them into the shallower water near the bank. His boots finally found purchase on the rocky bottom and he lifted her, carrying her up onto the muddy shore where he laid her down on the grass. She coughed up river water, her whole body shaking, and he turned her on her side, supporting her with one hand while she emptied her lungs. When the coughing finally subsided, she rolled onto her back, staring up at the bright blue Kansas sky with wide eyes the color of prairie grass in summer. Her wedding dress was ruined, torn and stained with mud, her veil long gone to the river. Her dark hair had come loose from its pins and lay in wet tangles around her pale face. "You are alive," Lucas said, his own breathing still hard. Water dripped from his hat brim, his shirt clung to his chest. "That is what matters." She looked at him then, really looked at him, taking in his weathered face and gray eyes, the strong line of his jaw, and the concern written plainly across his features. He was perhaps 25 years old, lean and sun-darkened, with the capable hands of a man who worked for his living. There was nothing soft about him, nothing polished or refined, but there was something solid and real that made her feel safe, even as she lay shivering in her destroyed wedding gown. "You saved my life," she whispered, her voice hoarse from the river water she had swallowed. "Yes, madam." He sat back on his heels, looking her over with the practiced eye of someone used to assessing injuries. "Are you hurt anywhere? Broken bones?" She tested her limbs carefully, moving her arms and legs. Everything ached, but nothing felt broken. "I do not think so. Just cold. So very cold." He stood and offered his hand, pulling her to her feet when she took it. She swayed, unsteady, and he steadied her with a hand on her elbow. "We need to get you warm and dry. Where were you getting married?" "The church in Ellsworth," she said, looking back across the river to where she could see figures gathering on the opposite bank. They looked very small and far away. "We were going to cross the river to take photographs at the canyon overlook. The photographer said the light was better on this side." "That photographer is a fool," Lucas said bluntly. The river has been running high for weeks. Everyone knows not to go near the banks right now." He looked at the gathered crowd across the water, his eyes narrowing. "That your intended husband?" She followed his gaze to where a man in a fine suit stood gesticulating wildly, apparently shouting, though they could not hear him over the river's roar. He made no move to enter the water, made no attempt to come after her. "Yes," she said quietly. "That is Theodore Blackthorne." Lucas said nothing, but his jaw tightened. A man who would let his bride nearly drown while he stood safe on shore was no man at all in his estimation. "Can you walk? My horse should be somewhere downstream if he has any sense. We need to get you to shelter." She nodded, and they began walking along the riverbank, her ruined dress dragging in the mud. She stumbled frequently, still weak from her ordeal, and each time his hand was there to steady her. They found his bay gelding grazing peacefully in a patch of new grass a quarter-mile down, the horse having had the good sense to swim for shore when its rider abandoned it. Lucas helped her into the saddle, then swung up behind her. She sagged against his chest, exhausted, and he wrapped one arm around her waist to hold her steady, while he guided the horse with the other. "There is a ranch about 3 miles from here," he said. "The Riverside Ranch. That is where I work. The owner's wife will have dry clothes and hot coffee." "I should go back," Grace said weakly, though she made no move to pull away from him. "Theodore will be worried." "Theodore can wait," Lucas said firmly. "You nearly died, Miss Wellington. Grace Wellington." She tilted her head back to look at him. "And you are?" "Lucas Remington, madam. Pleasure to meet you, though I wish it were under better circumstances." Despite everything, she felt a smile tug at her lips. "Indeed, Mr. Remington. This is not how I imagined my wedding day would proceed." They rode in silence for a while, the horse picking its way along the riverside trail. The spring afternoon was warm, but Grace continued to shiver, her wet clothes clinging to her skin. Lucas urged the horse faster, concerned about how pale she looked. Drowning was not the only danger. A chill could set in quickly and turn deadly. The Riverside Ranch came into view, a sprawling operation with a large main house, several outbuildings, and extensive corrals. Cattle grazed in the distance, fat and content in the spring grass. Lucas rode straight to the main house and dismounted, then lifted Grace down from the saddle. She was so light in his arms, so fragile seeming, despite the strength she had shown in surviving the river. The front door opened before they reached it, and a woman in her 40s emerged, her eyes widening at the sight of them. "Lucas, what on earth happened?" "River accident, Mrs. Patterson," Lucas said. "This is Miss Wellington. She needs dry clothes and somewhere warm to rest." Martha Patterson took one look at Grace's sodden wedding dress and pale face and immediately took charge. "Bring her inside. William," she called over her shoulder, "fetch blankets and stoke the fire." She put an arm around Grace's shoulders, guiding her into the house. "You poor dear. Come with me. We will get you out of those wet things." Lucas set Grace down in a chair near the fireplace while Martha disappeared upstairs, returning moments later with an armful of clothing and thick quilts. William Patterson, the ranch owner, appeared with more wood for the fire, building it up until heat radiated from the hearth. "Lucas, you should change as well," Martha said firmly. "You are dripping all over my floor. William, take him to the bunkhouse. I will care for Miss Wellington." Lucas hesitated, reluctant to leave Grace even though he knew she was in capable hands. His eyes met hers across the room, and something passed between them, some unspoken connection forged in the river's depths. Then he nodded and followed William out. Martha helped Grace out of the destroyed wedding dress, clicking her tongue at the ruined silk and lace. She wrapped Grace in warm quilts and sat her close to the fire with a cup of hot coffee liberally laced with whiskey. "Drink this, dear. It will warm you from the inside." Grace sipped the coffee gratefully, feeling warmth slowly return to her limbs. She wore one of Martha's simple day dresses now, dark blue cotton that was too large in places but blissfully dry. Her hair hung loose around her shoulders, drying in the fire's heat. "You are very lucky Lucas was there," Martha said, sitting across from her with her own cup of coffee. "He is one of our best hands. Been with us for 3 years now. Good man, steady and reliable. Keeps to himself mostly, but there is not a better horseman in 3 counties. "He was very brave," Grace said softly. "He risked his life for me, without hesitation." "That sounds like Lucas," Martha agreed. She studied Grace with kind eyes. "Today was your wedding day?" "It was supposed to be." Grace stared into her coffee cup. I have been engaged to Theodore Blackthorne for 6 months. He is a merchant in Ellsworth, quite successful. My parents arranged the match. They said I was lucky to have caught his interest. But what do you say? Martha asked gently. Grace was quiet for a long moment. I say that when the river took me, Theodore did not even try to come after me. He just stood there on the bank, shouting. Martha reached over and squeezed her hand. A person's true character shows in moments of crisis. Remember that, dear. Outside, Lucas stripped off his wet clothes in the bunkhouse and changed into dry denims and a fresh shirt. William Patterson leaned against the doorframe, watching him with an appraising eye. That was quite the heroic rescue, William said. The girl is lucky you were there. Anyone would have done the same, Lucas said, though they both knew that was not true. Many men would have hesitated, calculated the risk, and by then it would have been too late. She is a bride, Lucas, or was supposed to be. There will be complications. Lucas sat down to pull on his boots. I know that, sir, but I could not let her drown. Of course not. William was quiet for a moment. What did you think of the groom? The man who stood on the bank and let another man save his bride? I think, Lucas said carefully, that he is not worthy of her. William smiled slightly. I think you may be right about that. When Lucas returned to the main house an hour later, he found Grace still sitting by the fire, though color had returned to her cheeks. She looked up when he entered and smiled, a real smile that transformed her face from merely pretty to genuinely beautiful. Mr. Remington, she said, I have not properly thanked you. You saved my life at great risk to your own. I owe you a debt I can never repay. Lucas shifted uncomfortably, unused to such formal gratitude. You owe me nothing, Miss Wellington. I am just glad you are safe. Nevertheless, she stood, the borrowed dress swishing around her ankles. Is there anything I can do for you? Any way I can express my gratitude? He looked at her, at the earnestness in her green eyes, and something in his chest tightened. Just be well, madam. That is thanks enough. Martha emerged from the kitchen with fresh coffee. Miss Wellington should stay here tonight, she announced. It is too late to return to town, and she has been through a terrible ordeal. She needs rest. I could not impose, Grace protested, though her exhaustion was evident. Nonsense. It is settled. We have plenty of room. Martha looked at Lucas. Perhaps you could ride into Ellsworth and inform her family and her intended that she is safe. They will be worried. Lucas nodded, though the thought of facing Theodore Blackthorne made his jaw clench. Of course, madam. I will leave right away. The ride to Ellsworth took just over an hour. The town was bustling with late afternoon activity, cowboys and drovers mixing with townspeople on the main street. Lucas asked directions to the Blackthorne Mercantile and found it easily, a large establishment on the corner of the main thoroughfare. Theodore Blackthorne was inside, apparently having returned from the interrupted wedding, without much concern for his missing bride. He was a tall man in his late 30s with thinning hair and a paunch that spoke of too much good living. His suit was expensive, his manner pompous. Yes, he said when Lucas entered, looking him up and down with obvious disdain. Can I help you with something, cowboy? Lucas removed his hat, more out of habit than respect for this man. I am Lucas Remington from the Riverside Ranch. I am here about Miss Wellington. Blackthorne's expression shifted to something like annoyance. Ah, yes, my wayward bride. Where is she? I have had to explain to half the town why she ran off into the river. Most embarrassing. Lucas felt his temper rise, but kept his voice level. She did not run off, sir. The bank gave way beneath her. She nearly drowned. I pulled her from the river. How dramatic! Blackthorne waved a dismissive hand. Well, where is she now? The preacher is still waiting to perform the ceremony. She is resting at the Riverside Ranch. She will remain there tonight to recover from her ordeal. Mrs. Patterson is caring for her. Unacceptable. Blackthorne's face reddened. She will return immediately. We have a wedding to complete, and I will not be made a laughingstock because my bride decided to go for a swim. Lucas took a step forward, his hands clenched at his sides. That woman nearly died today. She needs rest and care. The wedding can wait. The wedding will happen tonight, or it will not happen at all, Blackthorne snapped. I have my reputation to consider. If Grace Wellington thinks she can make a fool of me, she is mistaken. You tell her she has until tomorrow afternoon to present herself at the church, or the engagement is off. Lucas stared at him, disgust churning in his gut. This man cared nothing for Grace, only for his own pride and reputation. "I will deliver your message," he said coldly. "But if Miss Wellington has any sense, she will tell you to go to hell." He turned and walked out before he did something he would regret, like plant his fist in Blackthorn's smug face. Outside, he stood on the boardwalk taking deep breaths, trying to calm himself. A woman's voice spoke behind him. "You are the man who saved Gracie." He turned to find an older woman watching him, her face lined with worry. She had Grace's green eyes, and he guessed this was her mother. "Yes, madam, Lucas Remington." "Helen Wellington." She twisted her hands together. "Is my daughter truly all right? Theodore said she was being hysterical and dramatic, but I know my daughter. She would not behave that way without cause. Your daughter nearly drowned, Mrs. Wellington. She was swept away by the river. If I had not been there." He did not finish the sentence. They both knew how it would have ended. Helen paled. Anne Theodore stood on the bank and watched. She closed her eyes briefly, pain flickering across her face. "I feared as much. He is not a kind man, Mr. Remington, but he is wealthy and respected. My husband insisted on the match. Grace is 22 years old. My husband believes she needs to be settled." "What your daughter needs," Lucas said firmly, "is to be with someone who values her life above his own reputation. What she needs is rest and care, which she is getting at the Riverside Ranch. And what she does not need is to be bullied into a marriage by a man who cares more about gossip than her well-being." Helen studied him for a long moment. "You care about her. You only just met her, but you care." Lucas had no answer for that. He barely understood it himself, this fierce protectiveness he felt for a woman he had known for only a few hours. "She deserves better than Blackthorn," he said finally. "Yes," Helen agreed softly. "She does, but my husband will not see it that way." She reached into her reticule and pulled out a small leather purse, pressing it into Lucas's hand. "Take this. Consider it payment for saving my daughter's life. And please, tell her." She paused, struggling with emotion. "Tell her that her mother loves her, no matter what she decides. Tell her that sometimes the bravest thing a woman can do is choose her own path." Lucas looked down at the purse, heavy with coins. "Mrs. Wellington, I cannot accept payment for doing what any decent man would do." "Please?" Helen's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "It would ease my heart to know that you have something for your bravery, and it would ease my conscience for pushing my daughter toward a man unworthy of her." Lucas nodded slowly and tucked the purse into his pocket. "I will tell her, madam, and I will make sure she is safe." He rode back to the ranch as the sun set, painting the Kansas sky in shades of orange and pink. His mind churned with thoughts of Grace, of the feel of her in his arms as he pulled her from the river, of the way she had looked at him with such trust. He barely knew her, yet something had shifted in him when he dove into that water, something fundamental and irrevocable. Grace was still by the fire when he returned, though she had clearly dozed off in the chair, her head resting against the wingback. She looked peaceful in sleep, young and vulnerable. Martha looked up from her mending and put a finger to her lips, gesturing for Lucas to follow her into the kitchen. "How did it go in town?" she asked quietly. Lucas told her about his encounter with Blackthorn, his face darkening as he recounted the merchant's callous words. Martha listened with growing anger. "That pompous, self-important fool!" she hissed. "How dare he? That poor girl nearly died, and all he cares about is his precious reputation." "There is more." Lucas told her about meeting Helen Wellington, about the mother's concern and her cryptic message. Martha's expression softened. At least her mother has some sense. The father, I take it, is a different story. I did not meet him, but from what Mrs. Wellington said, he is set on this marriage regardless of his daughter's wishes or safety. Martha sighed and set down her mending. "This happens too often. Women treated like property to be bartered and sold. Grace is lucky she has you looking out for her, Lucas." "I barely know her," Lucas said, but even as the words left his mouth, they felt false. How could he explain the connection he felt, forged in water and fear, and the fierce determination to save her life? "Sometimes knowing comes quick," Martha said wisely. "William and I knew within a week of meeting that we would marry. When it is right, you just know." Grace stirred in the other room, and Lucas returned to find her sitting up, blinking sleepily. She smiled when she saw him, a soft expression that made his heart beat faster. "You are back," she said. "Did you speak with Theodore?" Lucas sat down across from her, choosing his words carefully. "I did. He wants you to come to the church tomorrow afternoon, or he will call off the engagement." He expected relief, or at least some emotion, but Grace just looked at him steadily. "Did he ask if I was injured, if I was well?" "No, madam, he did not." She nodded slowly, unsurprised. "And my parents?" "I spoke with your mother. She gave me a message for you." He repeated Helen's words, watching Grace's eyes fill with tears. "Mama always understood," she whispered, "but Papa will be furious if I refuse Theodore." "What do you want, Miss Wellington?" Lucas asked quietly. "Not what your father wants or what is expected. What do you want?" Grace looked at him, at this stranger who had risked everything to save her, who had been kinder to her in a few hours than her intended husband had been in 6 months of courtship. "I want," she said slowly, "to not marry a man who cares so little for my life that he would not even try to save me. I want to not spend the rest of my days with someone who sees me as an embarrassment rather than a person. I want—" She trailed off, suddenly shy. "What?" Lucas prompted gently. "I want to know what it would be like to be valued by someone who sees me as worth saving." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Martha, who had been listening from the doorway, quietly retreated to give them privacy. Lucas leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his gray eyes serious. "You are worth saving, Grace Wellington. You are worth a man diving into a raging river. You are worth risking everything for. And if Theodore Blackthorne cannot see that, then he is the biggest fool in Kansas." Grace felt her breath catch. No one had ever spoken to her like this, with such fierce conviction. Theodore's courtship had been proper and formal, full of stiff compliments about her appearance and her family connections, but empty of any real feeling. This cowboy, this stranger, saw her more clearly after one afternoon than Theodore had in 6 months. "I cannot marry him," she said suddenly, the words feeling both terrifying and liberating. "I will not. I would rather be alone for the rest of my life than tie myself to a man who values his reputation over my well-being." "You would not be alone," Lucas said before he could stop himself. When she looked at him in surprise, he felt his face heat. "I mean, there are other options, other paths. You do not have to choose between a bad marriage and loneliness." "What other paths?" she asked softly, leaning forward. "Tell me, Lucas, what other life could there be for a woman like me?" He wanted to tell her, wanted to say that she could stay here, could build a life in this wild territory where a person's worth was measured by their character rather than their family name. Wanted to tell her that he could see a future, however impossible, where she was part of his world. But it was too soon, too fast, too unlikely. She was a merchant's daughter, educated and refined. He was a cowboy with nothing to his name but a good horse and a reputation for hard work. "Many paths," he said instead. "You could return to your family and refuse the marriage. You could seek employment as a teacher or a seamstress. You could travel west to California, where women have more freedom. You could homestead your own land. The world is wider than Ellsworth, Kansas, and you have more choices than you think." Grace absorbed this, her mind racing. She had lived her entire life following the expectations laid out for her. Be a good daughter, be agreeable, marry well, produce heirs. But what if she refused? What if she chose something else, something of her own making? "Would you help me?" she asked suddenly. "Not because you owe me anything," she added quickly when he opened his mouth to protest, "but because you seem to understand. Would you help me figure out what comes next?" Lucas felt as though he stood on a precipice, knowing that his answer would change everything. "Yes," he said simply. "I will help you however I can." They talked long into the night, sitting by the fire, while Martha and William discreetly retired upstairs. Grace told him about her life in Ellsworth, the suffocating expectations, the constant pressure to conform. Lucas told her about his life on the ranch, about the freedom of working under the open sky, about the satisfaction of honest labor. They discovered they both loved reading, though his collection of books was limited to a battered volume of Shakespeare and a few dime novels. They both loved horses and open spaces. They both felt most at peace near water, despite the day's traumatic events. As the fire burned low, Grace found herself watching the play of firelight across Lucas's face, the strong lines and weathered skin that spoke of a life lived outdoors. There was something fundamentally good about him, something honest and true that she had never encountered in the careful social circles of her youth. When he caught her staring and smiled, soft and a little shy, her heart did something complicated in her chest. "You should rest," he said finally, though he seemed reluctant to end their conversation. "Tomorrow will be difficult." "Will you be there?" she asked. "When I face Theodore and my father?" "If you want me to be." "I do." He stood and offered his hand to help her up. When she took it, he held on a moment longer than necessary, his calloused palm warm against hers. "Then I will be there, I promise." Grace slept in the Pattersons' guest room, in a comfortable bed with clean sheets that smelled of lavender. She should have been exhausted, but instead she lay awake, watching moonlight paint silver patterns on the ceiling. Her life had turned upside down in the space of a single day. She had nearly died, she had been saved by a stranger, she had decided to break her engagement, and she had met someone who made her feel things she had never felt before, stirring something deep and warm and entirely unexpected. In the bunkhouse, Lucas stared at the ceiling as well, his mind full of green eyes and dark hair, of the feel of her in his arms as he carried her from the river. He had saved lives before, pulled calves from difficult births, and helped men injured in ranch accidents. But this felt different. Grace Wellington had burrowed under his skin in a matter of hours, and he had no idea what to do about it. Morning came bright and clear, the Kansas sky washed clean by the previous week's rains. Grace borrowed another of Martha's dresses, a simple green cotton that brought out the color of her eyes. She pinned her hair up carefully, needing the armor of proper appearance for what was to come. Martha made a hearty breakfast of eggs and bacon, fresh bread, and strong coffee. "You will need your strength today, dear," she said, filling Grace's plate. "Standing up to expectations is hungry work." William and Lucas came in from the morning chores, both men cleaning up at the pump before sitting down to eat. Lucas's eyes found Grace immediately, checking to make sure she was well. She smiled at him and felt a small flutter of warmth when he smiled back. After breakfast, William offered to drive Grace and Lucas into town in the wagon, understanding that arriving on horseback would be difficult for a woman in a dress. The ride took just over an hour, the spring morning beautiful around them. Grace sat in the back with Martha, who had insisted on coming along for moral support, while Lucas rode up front with William. "Are you frightened?" Martha asked quietly. "Terrified," Grace admitted. "My father has a terrible temper, and Theodore will be furious." "But you are certain this is what you want?" Grace glanced at Lucas's back, at the straight set of his shoulders and the way he sat his seat with casual confidence. "I am certain that I cannot marry a man who cares so little for me. What comes after I do not know, but I know I cannot go through with the wedding." They arrived in Ellsworth late in the morning, the town busy with Saturday activity. William drove straight to the Wellington house, a large painted structure on a tree-lined street. Grace took a deep breath and climbed down from the wagon, smoothing her borrowed dress. Lucas was immediately at her side. "I will come in with you," he said. "You do not have to." "I know, but I am going to anyway." They climbed the steps together, Martha and William remaining with the wagon. Grace knocked on her own front door, feeling strange and displaced, as though she no longer belonged in this house where she had grown up. Her mother answered, her face flooding with relief. "Gracie, thank God you are safe." Helen embraced her daughter tightly. "I was so worried. Your father has been raging since yesterday. Theodore has been here twice, making threats." "I need to speak with Papa," Grace said, her voice steadier than she felt. "And with Theodore. I need to tell them that I will not be getting married." Helen's eyes widened, but there was approval in her expression. "You are sure?" "I am sure." "Then I will fetch your father. But Gracie, be prepared. He will not take this well." Helen disappeared into the house, leaving Grace and Lucas standing in the foyer. The house was elegantly furnished, speaking of wealth and status. Lucas felt distinctly out of place in his work clothes and worn boots, but he stood tall beside Grace, a silent pillar of support. George Wellington emerged from his study, a tall man with graying hair and a stern expression. He stopped short when he saw his daughter, his face darkening. "Grace, You finally deign to return. Do you have any idea the embarrassment you have caused? Theodore is threatening to sue for breach of contract. The entire town is gossiping about your theatrical display yesterday." "It was not theatrical," Grace said, her voice quiet but firm. "I nearly drowned, Papa. The riverbank collapsed beneath me." "And whose fault is that? You should not have been standing so close to the water." George's eyes fell on Lucas, his lip curling. "And who is this?" "This is Lucas Remington. He saved my life." George looked Lucas up and down dismissively. "I suppose you expect a reward for your trouble?" Lucas felt his temper flare, but kept his voice level. "I expect nothing, sir. I am here because your daughter asked me to be." "Well, you can leave. This is a family matter." "He stays," Grace said, surprising herself with her own boldness. "Papa, I have something to tell you. I will not be marrying Theodore Blackthorne." The room went very quiet. George stared at his daughter as though she had sprouted a second head. "Excuse me? I will not marry him. The engagement is off." George's face turned an alarming shade of red. "You will do no such thing. The contracts are signed. The arrangements are made. You will marry Theodore tomorrow morning, and that is final." "No?" Grace was shaking, but she held her ground. "I will not marry a man who left me to drown while he worried about his reputation. I will not tie myself to someone who sees me as property rather than a person. I refuse." "You refuse?" George's voice rose to a shout. "You ungrateful girl. Do you have any idea what this marriage means for this family? The business connections, the social advancement, and you are throwing it away because of your childish dramatics?" "It is not dramatics to want to be valued," Grace shouted back, her own temper finally breaking. "It is not childish to expect that my husband would at least try to save my life. Theodore stood on that bank and watched me nearly die, Papa. He did not lift a finger to help me. This man, this stranger, risked his own life without hesitation. Tell me which one of them is worthy of respect." "Theodore is a respected businessman with a fortune and a name. This cowboy is nobody." George gestured dismissively at Lucas. "This cowboy is worth 10 of Theodore Blackthorne," Grace said fiercely, "and I will not hear you disrespect him." George took a step toward his daughter, his hand raised, and Lucas moved without thinking. He stepped between them, his body shielding Grace, his gray eyes cold. "You will not touch her," he said quietly, but there was steel in his voice. George froze, seeming to really see Lucas for the first time. He saw the lean strength, the capable hands, the absolute conviction in the younger man's eyes. He saw someone who would not back down, not for money or status or threats. "Get out of my house," George said, his voice shaking with fury. "Both of you. Grace, if you walk out that door, you are no longer my daughter. You will receive nothing from me. No support, no money, no home. You will be on your own." Helen gasped from the doorway. "George, no! She is our daughter." "She is a disobedient, ungrateful child who is throwing away her future." George turned his back on them. "Leave, now." Grace felt tears sting her eyes, but she lifted her chin. "Goodbye, Papa. I am sorry I could not be the dutiful daughter you wanted. But I have to be true to myself, even if it costs me everything." She turned and walked out, Lucas right beside her. Helen followed them onto the porch, pressing a small bag into Grace's hands. "Your things," she whispered. "Some clothes and your mother's jewelry. It is yours by right." She hugged Grace tightly. "Be brave, my darling. You are doing the right thing." "Will Papa really disown me?" Grace asked, her voice small. "Your father is angry. Give him time. But even if he does not change his mind, you will be all right. I know you will." Helen looked at Lucas. "You will look after her?" "With my life, madam," Lucas said, and he meant it with every fiber of his being. They returned to the wagon where Martha and William waited. One look at their faces told the whole story. Martha immediately put her arm around Grace, who was trying very hard not to cry. "Well then," William said pragmatically, "looks like you will be staying at the ranch for a while, Miss Wellington." "I cannot impose on your hospitality," Grace protested. "You have already done so much." "Nonsense. You need a place to stay, and we have room. You can help Martha with the house and the cooking if you want to earn your keep. We have been meaning to hire help anyway." "We have?" Martha said, then caught on. "Oh yes, we certainly have. It is settled then. You will stay with us." Before they could leave town, Theodore Blackthorne appeared, striding down the street with a face like thunder. He stopped in front of the wagon, ignoring everyone except Grace. "Your father told me what you said. You are breaking our engagement?" "I am," Grace said, grateful for the elevation of the wagon seat that let her look down at him rather than up. "Because of some ridiculous fantasy? Because you think this cowboy is somehow better than me?" "No," Grace said clearly. "Because you let me nearly die and felt nothing but annoyance. Because you care more about your reputation than my life. Because I deserve better than a man who sees me as a business transaction rather than a human being." Theodore's face twisted with anger. "You will regret this. I will make sure everyone knows what kind of woman you are. Unfaithful, ungrateful, hysterical. You will be ruined in this town." Lucas stood up in the wagon, his height and the elevated position making him tower over Theodore. "Seems to me the only one getting ruined here is you, Blackthorn. Word is already spreading about how you left your bride to drown, how you cared more about your suit getting wet than her life. You might want to worry about your own reputation before you start threatening hers." Theodore opened his mouth, then closed it, apparently thinking better of whatever he had been about to say. He stepped back, his face mottled with fury. "This is not over." "Yes," Grace said firmly. "It is." William snapped the reins and they rolled away, leaving Theodore standing in the street. Grace did not look back. She kept her eyes forward on the open road ahead, though tears finally spilled down her cheeks. Lucas sat down beside her, not touching, but close enough that she could feel the solid warmth of his presence. "You did well," he said quietly. "That took courage." "I have lost everything," she whispered. "My family, my home, my future?" "No," he said, his voice firm. "You have lost things that were holding you back. Your future is still there, just different than you planned, and sometimes different is better." She looked at him through her tears and saw absolute conviction in his gray eyes. He believed what he was saying. He believed in her, this man who barely knew her, and somehow that made all the difference. The journey back to the Riverside Ranch felt different than the trip into town. Grace felt lighter somehow, despite having lost so much. She had shed the weight of expectations, of a future she had been dreading, of trying to be someone she was not. She had no idea what came next, but for the first time in her life, that uncertainty felt like freedom rather than fear. At the ranch, Martha showed Grace to a small room off the kitchen that was used for storage. Together they cleared it out, revealing a pleasant space with a window overlooking the corrals and a narrow bed with a straw mattress. "It is not much," Martha apologized, but Grace shook her head. "It is perfect. It is mine. My own space earned by my own choice." She set down her small bag of belongings, everything she now owned in the world fitting into one canvas sack. But she felt rich rather than poor, liberated rather than limited. Over the following days, Grace settled into life at the Riverside Ranch. She helped Martha with cooking and cleaning, discovering a talent for baking that surprised them both. Her bread became legendary among the ranch hands, and her apple pies were fought over at dinner. She learned to care for chickens and tend the vegetable garden, getting dirt under her fingernails and sun on her face. The work was hard but satisfying in a way her previous life had never been. And she saw Lucas every day. He worked from dawn until dusk, riding the range, mending fences, breaking horses, doing the 1,000 tasks that kept a ranch running. But he always made time to speak with her, to sit on the porch in the evening and talk while the sun set. They discussed everything and nothing, sharing dreams and stories and quiet laughter. Grace found herself watching for him, her heart lifting when she spotted him riding in from the range. She noticed things about him, small details that lodged in her mind. The way he was always gentle with the horses, even the difficult ones. The way he treated everyone with respect, from William Patterson to the youngest ranch hand. The way he looked at her, as though she was something precious and rare. Lucas was falling, and he knew it. Every day Grace was there. Every smile she gave him, every conversation they shared, he fell a little more. He loved her laugh, bright and genuine, so different from the strained politeness he had first encountered. He loved watching her discover her own strength and capability. He loved the way she looked in the morning, with flour on her cheek, and the way she looked in the evening with her hair loose around her shoulders. He loved her, plain and simple, with an intensity that sometimes stole his breath, but he held back, uncertain. She had just escaped one engagement. She needed time to find herself, to figure out what she wanted. He had no right to push his feelings on her, no matter how strong they were. She deserved better than a cowboy with no prospects and only his labor to offer. So he kept his love silent, tucked away where it burned like a banked fire, warming him but hidden from view. A month passed, then two. Spring turned to early summer, the Kansas prairie erupting in wildflowers. The cattle grew fat on good grass, and the ranch prospered. Grace bloomed like the prairie flowers, growing stronger and more confident with each passing day. She laughed more easily, spoke her mind without hesitation, and moved through the world with a new sureness of purpose. She also realized, with a mixture of joy and terror, that she was in love with Lucas Remington. It had crept up on her gradually, a deepening of friendship into something more profound. She loved the way he listened when she spoke, giving her his full attention as though her words mattered. She loved his quiet strength, the way he could calm a frightened horse or soothe an angry man with equal skill. She loved his hands, rough and capable, and his smile, rare but genuine. She loved him, and the knowledge of it filled her up until she thought she might burst. But she did not tell him. He had saved her, had helped her, had given her space to grow. She could not impose her feelings on him when he had already done so much, so she kept her love hidden, though it grew stronger every day. One evening in late June, after the supper dishes were washed and put away, Lucas asked if she would like to go for a walk. They had fallen into this habit, strolling around the ranch property as the day cooled, talking or simply enjoying the companionable silence. Tonight he led her down to the river, to a spot far from where the accident had happened. Here the water ran slow and peaceful, reflecting the orange and pink of the sunset sky. They sat on the grassy bank, watching the water flow past. "Are you happy here?" Lucas asked after a while. Grace considered the question seriously. "I am happier than I have ever been. I know that probably sounds strange, given that I have nothing to my name and am living on the charity of others. But I feel free for the first time in my life. I am making my own choices, living by my own labor. It is a good feeling." "It does not have to be charity," Lucas said carefully. "William and Martha have been talking about making your position permanent. A salary, official employment. They genuinely need the help, and you have proven yourself valuable." "I would like that," Grace said softly. Then, because she was learning to be brave, she added, "But I hope I will not be staying in the same capacity forever." Lucas looked at her, his heart suddenly pounding. "What do you mean?" Grace took a breath, gathering her courage. "I mean that I hope someday to have a home of my own, a family of my own, with someone who loves me and values me as I am." "You will," Lucas said, his voice rough. "Any man would be lucky to have you, Grace Wellington." "I am not thinking of any man," she said, looking directly at him. "I am thinking of one man specifically, a man who saved my life, a man who has shown me more kindness and respect in 2 months than I received in 22 years, a man I have come to care for deeply." Lucas stared at her, hardly daring to believe what he was hearing. "Grace." "I love you, Lucas Remington," she said, the words tumbling out in a rush now that she had started. "I know I should not. I know it is too soon. I know you probably do not feel the same way. But I am tired of hiding how I feel. I am tired of being silent and proper and appropriate. I love you, and I needed you to know." For a moment, Lucas could not speak, could not breathe. Then he was moving, closing the distance between them, his hands cupping her face gently, reverently, as though she might break. "You love me?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Yes," she said, tears gathering in her eyes. "I love you." "Grace Wellington, I have loved you since the moment I pulled you from that river," he said fiercely. "I have loved you every day since. I love your courage and your kindness and your strength. I love the way you laugh, and the way you think, and the way you see the world. I love everything about you, and I have been half mad trying to keep it to myself." "Then why did you?" she asked, laughing and crying at the same time. "Because you deserve better than a cowboy with nothing to offer. Because you had just escaped one engagement, and I did not want to pressure you into another. Because I was afraid you would not feel the same way." "I feel the same way," she said, her hands coming up to cover his. "I love you, Lucas, not because you saved my life, though you did, not because you are good and kind, though you are. I love you because you see me, the real me, not the proper merchant's daughter or the dutiful wife. You see me, and you value what you see. That is worth more than all the money and status in the world." He kissed her then, gentle and careful, as though she was something infinitely precious. She kissed him back with all the love she had been holding inside, pouring it out in that single moment of connection. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless, their foreheads resting together. "Marry me," Lucas said. "I know I have nothing to offer you right now. I have no land of my own, no house. But I am a hard worker, and I save my wages. In a year or two, I could maybe buy a small place, nothing fancy but ours. Or if you do not want to wait, we could homestead, take a claim, and build from nothing. It would be hard work, harder than anything you have known. But we would be together, and we would be building something of our own." "Yes," Grace said without hesitation. "Yes to all of it. I do not need fancy things or social status. I just need you. We can homestead or stay here working for William and Martha, or do whatever makes sense. As long as we are together, that is all that matters." Lucas kissed her again, longer this time, deeper, full of promise and joy, and the beginning of forever. When they finally returned to the ranch house, walking hand in hand, Martha took one look at their faces and burst into delighted laughter. "Well, it is about time," she exclaimed. William, come quickly. Lucas and Grace are engaged." William emerged from his study, trying to look surprised and failing. "Engaged, are they? Well, I suppose we should have seen that coming." He shook Lucas's hand warmly and kissed Grace's cheek. "Congratulations to you both. I am truly happy for you." They married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the ranch, with William and Martha standing as witnesses and a circuit preacher performing the service. Grace wore a dress that Martha helped her sew, simple blue calico with white lace at the collar. She had wildflowers in her hair, and her mother's jewelry at her throat, and Lucas thought she had never looked more beautiful. He wore his best clothes, boots polished to a shine, his hair neatly trimmed. When he said his vows, his voice was steady and clear, promising to love and cherish her for all his days. When she said hers, tears of joy streaming down her face, his heart felt full enough to burst. They kissed as husband and wife while Martha wept happily and William cheered. A handful of other ranch hands attended, men who had come to respect both Lucas and Grace during their time at the Riverside Ranch. They celebrated with a simple dinner of roast beef and potatoes, apple pie and fresh bread, and toasted the newlyweds with good whiskey. That night, in the small room that had become Grace's, now transformed into their shared space, Lucas held his wife in his arms and marveled at the turn his life had taken. 3 months ago, he had been alone, a solitary cowboy with no family and no prospects beyond the next day's work. Now he had Grace, brilliant and beautiful and brave, and a future that stretched out bright and full of possibility. "Are you happy?" he asked her, the same question he had posed by the river. "I am happier than I ever dreamed possible," she answered, snuggling closer to him. "Who knew that nearly drowning would turn out to be the best thing that ever happened to me?" He laughed and kissed the top of her head. "I am glad I was there, glad I could save you. But Grace, you saved me too. You gave me something to live for beyond just existing. You gave me love and hope and a future. You saved me just as much as I saved you." She tilted her face up to kiss him. "Then we are even." They stayed at the Riverside Ranch for another year, both working and saving every penny. Lucas continued his ranch work, while Grace managed the household and helped Martha with the increasing demands of a growing operation. They lived frugally, putting aside nearly everything they earned, dreaming of the day they could claim land of their own. Grace wrote to her mother regularly, long letters full of news about ranch life and her marriage. Helen wrote back with tales of Ellsworth, carefully avoiding mention of Grace's father, who remained stubbornly angry at his daughter's defiance. But Helen's letters were warm and loving, full of support for her daughter's choices. She sent small packages of tea and fabric, ribbons and books, little luxuries that Grace treasured. Theodore Blackthorne had left Ellsworth 6 months after the failed wedding, his reputation in tatters. The story of how he had left his bride to drown had spread throughout the county, and business at his mercantile had suffered accordingly. He sold the store and moved to Kansas City, seeking to rebuild his fortunes where people did not know his shame. In the fall of 1876, Lucas and Grace filed a homestead claim on 160 acres of prairie land, about 10 miles from the Riverside Ranch. It was good land, with a small creek running through it and plenty of grass for cattle. They spent the winter building a small cabin with help from William and the other ranch hands, all of them working together to raise walls and a roof before the worst of the winter weather set in. It was hard work, the hardest Grace had ever done. Her hands blistered and her back ached, but she had never felt more satisfied. This was hers, earned by her own labor. Every log they placed, every nail they drove, was building something real and lasting. They moved into the cabin in January of 1877, with the snow falling soft and steady outside. It was small, just 2 rooms, but it was warm and solid and theirs. Martha had given them quilts, and William had given them a milk cow. They had chickens and a vegetable garden plot staked out for spring, and Lucas's small herd of cattle grazing on their land. That first night in their own home, they sat by the fire holding hands, watching the flames dance, and feeling the weight of accomplishment settle over them. "We did it," Grace said softly. "We built a home." "We did," Lucas agreed. "And this is just the beginning. In a few years we will expand the cabin, add more rooms. We will grow our herd, maybe hire help. We will build something good here, Grace, something lasting." "We already have," she said, placing his hand over her belly, where new life was just beginning to make itself known. "We already have." Lucas stared at her, understanding dawning. "Grace, are you—" "Yes," she said, smiling through sudden tears. "I am with child. We are going to have a baby." He swept her into his arms, holding her close, his face buried in her hair. "A baby," he breathed. "Our baby. Grace, that is wonderful. That is perfect. That is everything." She laughed, crying, holding him just as tightly. I know. Their son was born in September of 1877, delivered by Martha Patterson with Lucas pacing anxiously outside. When Martha finally emerged to tell him he had a healthy boy, Lucas burst into the room to find Grace exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in soft blankets. "Meet your son," she said softly. Lucas looked down at the small red face, the tiny fingers curled into fists, and felt his world shift on its axis. This was his son, his and Grace's. This tiny person was theirs to love and protect and raise. The responsibility of it was staggering, but so was the joy. "He is perfect," Lucas whispered. "What should we name him?" "I was thinking James," Grace said. "James William Remington, after your grandfather and the man who gave us our start." "James William," Lucas repeated, trying it out. The baby yawned, revealing pink gums, and Lucas laughed. "Hello, James. I am your papa, and I promise you, I will spend every day of my life making sure you know you are loved and valued. You will never doubt your worth, not for a single moment." Grace watched her husband with their son and felt her heart swell. This was the life she had chosen, the path she had forged when she refused to marry Theodore Blackthorne. This small cabin with its simple furnishings, this rough cowboy with his gentle hands, this tiny baby with his whole life ahead of him. This was what happiness looked like, what love felt like, what home meant. The years passed in a rhythm of seasons and growth. Their homestead prospered, the herd growing steadily. Lucas proved himself an excellent rancher, with a gift for breeding strong cattle and managing the land. Grace became known throughout the county for her skills as a midwife and healer, learning from Martha and from her own experience. She helped deliver babies and set broken bones, earning respect and gratitude from their neighbors. James grew into a sturdy boy, with his father's gray eyes and his mother's dark hair. He learned to ride before he could barely walk, and followed Lucas everywhere, absorbing lessons about cattle and horses and the land. He was joined by a sister in 1879, little Emma Grace, who had her mother's green eyes and a smile that could charm anyone. Then another son in 1881. Thomas, quiet and thoughtful, with a gift for working with animals. In the spring of 1882, a letter arrived from Ellsworth. Helen Wellington wrote that George had suffered a stroke over the winter. He had survived, but was left weakened and, according to Helen, changed. He spoke often of his daughter, expressing regret for his harshness. Would Grace consider visiting? Grace and Lucas discussed it at length. The wounds of that day 5 years earlier had healed, but the scars remained. Still, he was her father, and Grace found that despite everything, she wanted to see him. They made the trip to Ellsworth in June, bringing all 3 children. The town had grown but was still recognizable. The Wellington house looked the same, though perhaps a bit shabbier than Grace remembered. Helen met them at the door, older but still graceful, her face lighting up at the sight of her grandchildren. George Wellington was in a chair in the parlor, thinner than Grace remembered, his left side noticeably weaker. But when he saw her, his eyes filled with tears. "Grace," he said, his voice slurred but comprehensible. "My Grace, I am sorry, so very sorry." Grace went to him, kneeling beside his chair. "Papa, I am here. I was wrong," he said, gripping her hand with his good one. "So wrong about everything, about Blackthorn, about you, about what mattered. I threw away my daughter for the sake of pride and reputation. Can you ever forgive me?" Grace felt her own tears fall. "Of course I forgive you, Papa. You are my father. I never stopped loving you, even when we were apart." George turned to Lucas, who stood quietly by the door holding Thomas. "You, Cowboy, come here." Lucas approached, uncertain, and George looked up at him with clear eyes. "You saved my daughter's life, and then you gave her a good life, a happy life. I see it in her face, in the way she looks at you, in these beautiful children. You did what I could not. You saw her worth and honored it. Thank you." Lucas felt a lump in his throat. "She is easy to love, sir, and easy to honor. She is the best person I know." They stayed in Ellsworth for a week, reconnecting with Helen and slowly rebuilding a relationship with George. The children charmed their grandparents utterly. James was bold and friendly. Emma was sweet and affectionate, and Thomas was solemnly interested in everything. By the time they left, there were promises of future visits and letters. A bridge rebuilt if not quite the same as before. On the ride home, Grace leaned against Lucas's shoulder, watching the prairie roll past. "I am glad we went," she said. "I did not realize how much I needed that closure." "He has changed," Lucas observed. "Losing you, nearly losing his life, it gave him perspective." "Maybe that is what hardship does," Grace mused. "It strips away the unnecessary and shows us what really matters. I nearly drowned, and it showed me I was living the wrong life. Papa nearly died, and it showed him what he had thrown away. Sometimes we need to lose everything to understand what we truly value." "I am grateful I found you when I did," Lucas said, kissing the top of her head. "Before you married Blackthorn, before it was too late." "The river brought us together," Grace said softly. "It nearly killed me, but it also gave me life. It gave me you." Their homestead continued to grow and prosper. By 1885, they had expanded the cabin into a proper house with 4 bedrooms and a large kitchen. They had hired 2 ranch hands to help with the growing herd, and Grace had planted an orchard of apple trees that were just beginning to bear fruit. They were not wealthy by any means, but they were comfortable, secure, and deeply content. James was now 8 years old, already showing signs of becoming an excellent horseman like his father. Emma was 6, bright and curious, with her mother's love of reading. Thomas was 4, still quiet, but with a deep well of emotion that expressed itself in his gentle handling of animals. They added a 4th child in 1884, another daughter they named Helen Martha, after the 2 women who had helped Grace find her way. Baby Helen had her father's gray eyes and a placid temperament that made her easy to care for. Grace often thought back to that day at the river, to the terror of the water closing over her head and the strong hand that pulled her back to life. Everything good in her life had flowed from that moment. The man she loved, the children she treasured, the home they had built together, all of it traced back to Lucas diving into the canyon river without hesitation. She told him so one evening as they sat on their porch watching the sunset, the children playing in the yard before them. "Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if you had not been there that day," she said, "if no one had saved me." "Do not think about that," Lucas said firmly, pulling her closer. "You are here. That is what matters. But it could have been different. I could have drowned. Or someone else could have saved me and we never would have met. Our children would not exist. This life we built would not be." "But it is," he said, kissing her temple. "This is real. We are real. And Grace, even if someone else had saved you from the river, I like to think we still would have found each other somehow. Some things are just meant to be." She smiled and settled against him, watching James help Thomas climb a tree, while Emma read a story to baby Helen on a blanket. This was meant to be. This family, this home, this life. It had started with fear and water and a stranger's courage, but it had grown into something beautiful and lasting. In 1887, Lucas and Grace traveled to the World's Fair in Kansas City, leaving the children with William and Martha for a week. It was their first time away from the homestead since they had claimed it, their first real adventure as a couple without the responsibilities of farming and parenting. They walked through the exhibition halls, marveling at new inventions and agricultural displays. They ate food from vendors and attended lectures on modern farming techniques. They stayed in a hotel with indoor plumbing and electric lights, marvels of the modern age. But their favorite part of the trip was simply being together, walking hand in hand through the city streets, talking and laughing and remembering why they had fallen in love in the first place. One evening, they stood on a bridge over the Missouri River, watching the water flow past, and Grace felt a shiver of memory. "Are you all right?" Lucas asked, immediately concerned. "I am fine," she assured him. "Just remembering another river, another time." "The Canyon River changed both our lives that day," Lucas said softly. "I was just a cowboy with no family and no prospects. You were a woman trapped in a life that did not fit. And then the water brought us together." "Do you ever regret it?" Grace asked. "Taking on a merchant's daughter with no practical skills and a complicated family situation?" Lucas turned to face her fully, his hands cupping her face. "I have never regretted a single moment with you, Grace Remington. Not one. You are the best thing that ever happened to me. You gave me a family, a purpose, a reason to build something lasting. Every day with you is a gift." She kissed him there on the bridge with people streaming past, not caring who saw or what they thought. This was her husband, her partner, the love of her life, and she would never stop being grateful that he had been by the river that spring day in 1875. They returned home to find the children had been perfect angels for Martha, which Grace suspected was a generous interpretation of events. But everyone was healthy and happy, and the homestead had not burned down, so she counted it as a success. Life returned to its comfortable rhythm of seasons and work and family. In 1890, Grace received word that her father had passed peacefully in his sleep. She and Lucas traveled to Ellsworth for the funeral, bringing all 4 children. The service was well attended, and George was remembered as a successful businessman and community leader. But at the graveside, Helen took Grace's hand and spoke softly. At the end, he spoke of you constantly, of his regret for the years he missed with you and your family. He died at peace, knowing you had forgiven him, but he never quite forgave himself. Grace felt tears slip down her cheeks. "I wish we had reconciled sooner, that the children could have known him better." "He knew them," Helen said. "You sent photographs and letters. He treasured everyone. He knew his grandchildren, and he was proud of the woman you became. That is something." After the funeral, Helen announced that she planned to sell the house in Ellsworth and move closer to Grace and Lucas. She was lonely, she said, and wanted to be near her grandchildren. They helped her find a small house in the nearby town of Hayes, close enough to visit regularly, but with her own independence. Helen bloomed in her new life, freed from the social expectations of Ellsworth, becoming a beloved grandmother, an active member of the community. The years continued to pass, marked by growth and change. James grew into a young man, tall and capable, with dreams of studying animal husbandry at the new agricultural college. Emma became a teacher, educating children in a one-room schoolhouse near their homestead. Thomas took naturally to ranching and worked alongside Lucas, the two of them expanding the operation steadily. Little Helen, no longer so little, showed artistic talent and spent hours sketching the prairie landscape and the horses she loved. Lucas and Grace grew older together, their hair graying, their faces weathering, but their love deepening with each passing year. They faced hardships together, including droughts and harsh winters, sick cattle and crop failures, but they weathered each storm side by side. Their homestead became a ranch, their ranch became successful, and their family became a cornerstone of the community. On their 20th wedding anniversary in 1897, their children threw them a party. Friends and neighbors came from miles around to celebrate. There was music and dancing, food and laughter, stories shared and memories made. As the evening wound down and guests began to depart, Lucas pulled Grace aside, leading her away from the house toward the small creek that ran through their property. 20 years, he said, sitting on the grassy bank with her beside him. 20 years since you agreed to marry me. 20 years and 4 children and a successful ranch later, Grace said, leaning against his shoulder. We have built a good life, Lucas. We have, he agreed. But you know what I am most grateful for? Not the land or the cattle or even the children, as much as I love them. I am most grateful for you, for getting to spend every day with you, for watching you grow and change and become even more amazing than you were the day I met you. Grace felt tears gather in her eyes. I love you so much, more now than I did when we married, which I would not have thought possible. You are my partner, my best friend, my home. And you are mine, he said, kissing her softly. Always and forever, you are mine and I am yours. They sat by the creek as the stars came out, holding hands and watching the water flow past, thinking of another river in another time that had changed both their lives forever. By 1900, as the new century dawned, Lucas and Grace were grandparents 3 times over. James had married and had 2 children, a boy and a girl. Emma had married a teacher from a neighboring county and was expecting her first child. Thomas remained unmarried but devoted to the ranch, managing it alongside Lucas as the older man began to slow down. Helen had gone east to study art at a prestigious school, sending home letters full of wonder at the wider world. Lucas was 51 now, his hair more gray than dark, his face deeply lined by years of sun and wind. But he was still strong, still capable, still rising before dawn to check the cattle and mend fences. Grace was 47, her beauty having aged into something even more compelling, a face that showed character and wisdom, laugh lines around her eyes, and strength in every feature. They sat together one evening on the porch of their ranch house, much expanded from that first small cabin. The sun was setting over the prairie, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold that reflected off the distant creek. Cattle lowed in the distance. Somewhere a child laughed, one of their grandchildren playing in the yard. Do you ever think about what might have been? Lucas asked, his arm around Grace's shoulders. If you had married Blackthorn, if I had not been at the river that day? I try not to, Grace admitted. It is too terrible to contemplate. But sometimes I do wonder. And then I look at our life, our family, everything we have built, and I am so grateful things happened the way they did. Even the bad parts, your father disowning you, having to start from nothing. Even those parts, she said firmly. Because they taught me what I was capable of. They showed me that I could survive hardship and come out stronger. And they led me here, to you, to this life. I would go through it all again in a heartbeat if it meant ending up exactly where I am now. Lucas held her closer, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair, feeling the solid warmth of her against his side. You know what I remember most clearly from that day? Not the terror of the river or the fear that I might not reach you in time. What I remember is holding you on the bank afterwards, when you were safe. I remember looking at you and thinking that I had never seen anyone so beautiful or so brave. And I remember deciding right then that I would do whatever it took to be part of your life. You succeeded, Grace said softly. You became my whole life. My entire world revolves around you and our family. And I have never regretted it, not for a single instant. They sat in comfortable silence as the last light faded from the sky and stars began to appear. This was their life, the one they had chosen and built together. It had started with water and fear and unexpected heroism, but it had grown into something extraordinary. A love that had weathered every storm, a family that had thrived against the odds, a legacy that would continue long after they were gone. Inside the house, Martha called that dinner was ready. Yes, Martha Patterson still visited regularly, she and William having become like family over the years. They rose slowly now, joints stiff from years of hard work, and walked hand in hand into the warm glow of their home. As they crossed the threshold, Grace looked back at the prairie, at the land they had tamed and nurtured, at the life they had built from nothing. She thought of that day 25 years ago when the canyon river had sucked her off her feet, when a cowboy had said, "Breathe slow, I have got your waist," and changed the course of her entire life. She would never stop being grateful for that moment, for the water that brought them together, for the courage that saved her life, for the love that had sustained them through decades of joy and hardship. It had all been worth it. Every struggle, every sacrifice, every moment of uncertainty. It had all led to this, to standing in the doorway of her home with her husband's hand in hers, surrounded by family and love and the deep satisfaction of a life well lived. The years continued their steady march. Lucas and Grace grew older, but never apart, their love a constant in a changing world. They saw automobiles replace horses on the roads and heard about airplanes flying overhead. The wild west of their youth became tamer, more settled, but the prairie they loved remained vast and beautiful. In 1912, as they celebrated their 35th wedding anniversary, surrounded by children and grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren, someone asked Grace to tell the story of how she and Lucas met. It had become a family legend, told and retold, but never lost its power. Grace looked at Lucas, saw him smiling at her with all the love of their years together, shining in his gray eyes, and began to speak. It was the spring of 1875, and I was about to make the biggest mistake of my life, she said. I was going to marry a man I did not love, a man who did not value me. But then the Canyon River swept me away, and a cowboy dove in without hesitation to save me. She told the story of the water closing over her head, of the terror and the cold, of strong hands grabbing her waist and a calm voice telling her to breathe slow. She told of being carried to safety, of recognizing even then that this stranger was someone special. She told of breaking her engagement, of facing down her father and her intended, of choosing an uncertain future over a certain misery. And then, she said, taking Lucas's hand, I got to build the most extraordinary life with the most extraordinary man. We started with nothing but love and determination. And look what we created. This ranch, this family, this legacy. All of it started the day the river tried to take me and Lucas refused to let me go. The children and grandchildren listened, entranced as always by the story. The youngest great-grandchild, a boy of 3, climbed into Lucas's lap and looked up at him with wide eyes. You saved Grandma from the water? He asked. I did, Lucas confirmed, ruffling the boy's hair. That was very brave. Your grandmother was brave too, Lucas said, looking at Grace. She was brave enough to change her entire life, brave enough to trust a stranger, brave enough to build something new from nothing. I just gave her the opportunity. She did all the hard work. We did it together, Grace corrected. Everything good in my life, we built together. As the party continued around them, Lucas and Grace slipped away, walking out to their favorite spot by the creek. They moved slowly now, both in their 60s, but they still walked hand in hand as they had for 35 years. Do you ever miss the excitement of those early days? Lucas asked, when everything was new and uncertain. Not even a little bit, Grace said honestly. I love the life we have now. I love our family and our stability and knowing that we built something that will last beyond us. The uncertainty was necessary, but I do not miss it. I feel the same way, Lucas admitted, though I do miss being young enough to ride all day without my back complaining. Grace laughed. We have earned our aches and pains. Every one of them represents something we built or someone we loved. They sat on the bank, watching the water flow past, holding hands and thinking their own thoughts. 35 years since that day at the Canyon River. 35 years of love and life and building something beautiful together. It had been everything Grace could have hoped for, and more than she had ever dreamed possible. Thank you, she said suddenly. For what? For being there that day, for saving me, for loving me, for building this life with me, for everything. Lucas brought her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. Thank you for being worth saving, for choosing me, for making every day an adventure. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Grace Remington, then, now, and always. They sat together as the sun set on another day, another year, another chapter of their extraordinary story. The story of how a river tried to take a bride, how a cowboy said, breathe slow, I have got your waist, and how that single moment of connection became a lifetime of love. And they lived, content and happy, surrounded by the family they had created and the legacy they had built, knowing that they had found in each other something rare and precious, not just safety from a river's current, but a love that ran deeper than any water, stronger than any storm, lasting longer than any hardship. They had found home in each other's arms, and that was the greatest treasure of all.